What if Africa discovered Europe first? It began with a silence that felt like the pause between heartbeats, a silence before history changed direction. They said the Atlantic was endless. They said it swallowed men whole, that beyond the horizon was nothing but water and madness. But in the year 1311, on the golden banks of the Niger, a king of Mali looked west and saw something else, possibility. His name was Abubakari Keita II, the Musa who refused to be caged by the known world. While others built palaces, he built questions. While other rulers clung to power, he yearned for discovery. He had inherited one of the richest empires in human history, an empire whose gold fed the markets of Cairo and Venice, whose scholars filled the libraries of Timbuktu, whose merchants carried salt, silk, and stories across deserts. And yet, to him, it was not enough. Abubakari would stand for hours at the mouth of the Gambia River, watching the ocean's breath rise and fall. If the Niger flows endlessly, he would ask his court scholars, then where does the water go when it meets the sea? The scholars spoke of the world as a circle, as written in the old manuscripts of Kemet. The astronomers of Gao said the stars curved toward the west like a great bridge of fire. The sailors whispered of floating forests and endless winds beyond the horizon. Abubakari listened to them all, and then made the most radical decision in African history. He would send ships westward to find the edge of the world. In a time when Europe struggled in the shadows of the Middle Ages, its villages plagued, its kings at war, its streets haunted by hunger, Africa shone like a constellation on earth. From the libraries of Timbuktu to the gold markets of Tagaza, the continent thrummed with intellect and wealth. So when the Musa called for ships, thousands answered. The empire's shipwrights, masters of river and sea, built vessels of cedar and oak, each one vast enough to carry entire villages of men. They loaded them with rice, dates, honey, and water. Astronomers charted the positions of the stars, priests read the winds, griots sang blessings into the sails. 200 ships glided out from the coast, their hulls gleaming under a molten sun. The people gathered on the shore, their chants echoing across the waves. For weeks, the fleets vanished into the horizon. Only one ship ever returned. The captain fell to his knees before the Musa and said, "We sailed until the sea itself began to flow into a great river. My ship turned back." The others continued, and were swallowed by the current. Abubakari listened. Then he stood in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "Then I will go myself." He handed his crown to his brother, Mansa Musa, and gathered a new fleet, 1,000 ships this time. He left with scholars, soldiers, merchants, poets, and astronomers. He left without fear, because in his heart burned the idea that the world was larger than memory allowed. And this is where history stopped recording, and where imagination begins to breathe. In our world, the ships of Abubakari disappeared into myth. But in another world, one just a breath away, the winds favored them. The currents carried them west, not into oblivion, but toward destiny. Weeks passed. The sailors grew weary, their skin salted by the endless spray. They spoke to the ocean as if it could hear them. Then, one night, the lookout cried out. Ahead lay a mist unlike any they had seen before, a wall of silver light that shimmered like a living thing. The Musa ordered the fleet to move forward. As they entered the fog, the air grew cold. The stars above bent and twisted, as though rearranging themselves into new constellations. When the mist finally parted, dawn revealed something no African had ever seen: cliffs of gray stone rising from a narrow coast, forests of black pines, and a sky the color of steel. Europe. But not the Europe of power, this was the Europe of the 14th century, fractured and fearful. Kingdoms squabbled over soil, peasants prayed for food, and priests spoke of sin more than salvation. When the first villagers saw the ships, they thought the sea had delivered gods. Great black sails blotted out the sun. Drums thundered across the water. The air carried the scent of spices and gold. Abubakari stood at the prow of his flagship, wrapped in white, eyes sharp with wonder. He did not come to conquer. He came to understand. They landed near what would one day be called Portugal, though no such name yet existed. The people there had never seen men dressed in silk and copper, with skin like polished earth and voices that sang when they spoke. The Munsah's men built fires and shared food with the locals. They traded salt for bread, beads for wool. The Africans studied the stars from this new latitude and wrote in their journals, "The world bends differently here. The moon is the same, but the cold bites like an idea." Soon, word spread through the villages, of strangers from the sunlands, of ships made of gold, of men who read the heavens as if it were a book. Some called them angels. Others called them omens. But the truth was simpler, and more extraordinary. Africa had discovered Europe. And in that moment, the axis of history tilted. For the first time, the direction of knowledge flowed from south to north. African sailors taught the Europeans how to navigate using the stars. Their astronomers mapped the coasts, their physicians treated sicknesses with herbs unknown to the northern world. The villagers listened to stories of Timbuktu, a city with more books than people, where scholars debated the nature of light and time. The priests, at first, resisted. "These men are not of our God," they warned. "Their sun is too bright." But curiosity is a hunger no sermon can silence. Young monks began learning from the African scribes, copying their maps, translating their mathematics. The word kalam, meaning pen, in the languages of the desert, entered their vocabulary, spreading across the monasteries like wildfire. Within a year, the first African-built observatory stood on a hill overlooking the Atlantic coast, the Tower of Abubakari. From there, scholars studied the heavens and spoke of new worlds yet unseen. The old hierarchies began to tremble. Europe, once shrouded in superstition, began to wake up under an African dawn. And far across the sea, in Timbuktu, the griot sang of the king who had touched the edge of the world, and found a mirror instead. Part 2. The Inverted World. Imagine the sun rising from the west, and the world watching in disbelief. The year was 1313, 2 winters after the ships of Mali touched the stony shores of the far north. By then, the first settlements had been built. Huts of clay and thatch stood beside wooden cottages. Smoke curled into a sky thick with gulls. The villagers who once whispered in fear now brought their children to see the strangers from the sunlands. The Africans called this new coast Bara, meaning the edge. It was where the ocean's breath turned to frost, where the songs of the desert met the winds of the Atlantic. Under the flag of the Golden Sun, Munsah Abubakari II ruled not as a conqueror but as a teacher. He sent expeditions inland, not to take, but to learn. His scholars walked the forests and mountains, collecting plants, observing stars, studying languages. They recorded everything. And everywhere they went, they found a world trembling on the edge of darkness. Europe, in the early 14th century, was a continent of cold hands and hungry eyes. The feudal lords fought over borders drawn with blood. Peasants bowed to kings who barely remembered their names. The church preached salvation through fear. When the Africans arrived, their presence was like a mirror that reflected all of Europe's fragility. The newcomers spoke of cities where law was reason, not whim. They spoke of markets where gold was measured by trust, not greed. They spoke of universities where women taught men, and students from every land debated beneath the stars. At first, the Europeans could not believe such a place existed. "Surely you speak of heaven," one monk said. "No," replied an African scholar, smiling gently. "We speak of home." The first true exchange began with knowledge. From the city of Bara, African engineers taught carpenters how to bend wood for stronger ships. Blacksmiths from Mali shared the secret of tempered steel, a method that made swords lighter and sharper. Mathematicians demonstrated new ways to measure the heavens, introducing geometry unknown to the West. Soon, the coastal lords invited the Africans to their courts. They marveled at the fabrics dyed with gold dust, the instruments that charted the movement of stars, the books bound in leather and written in scripts that seemed to glow. The Africans, in turn, studied Europe's ways. They saw courage in its people, a stubborn faith in things unseen. But they also saw sickness, not of the body, but of the soul. Abubakari wrote in his journal, "These lands are cold not only in air but in spirit. Their people pray with fear instead of wonder. They bow to kings who have forgotten mercy. We shall teach them balance." And so began what history would later call the inverted Renaissance. It started quietly, with children. African teachers opened the first schools in the villages, teaching both letters and rhythm, numbers and philosophy. The young learned to question rather than obey. They studied maps of lands beyond their imagination, Mali, Ghana, Kemet, Songhai, where cities gleamed beneath a sun so bright it painted the streets with gold. The old priests tried to ban these lessons. "Their wisdom is heresy," they cried. "They will lead our children astray." But curiosity had already taken root. Soon, European scribes began copying African manuscripts by candlelight. They translated the Book of Stars from Timbuktu into Latin. They wrote of a universe that was not centered around Earth, an idea that shook the pillars of their faith. One night, in a castle overlooking the coast, a European noble named Lord Edmund of Castile met with Musa Abubakari. He was a man torn between worlds, raised by the sword, but hungry for truth. "They call you gods," he said, pouring wine into 2 cups. "Yet you live as men do." Abubakari smiled. "That is because we are men. It is knowledge, not blood, that raises one above ignorance." Edmund leaned forward. "And what will you do with our world?" The Musa looked toward the ocean. "We will do what the ocean does, shape the shore without breaking it." That night, a pact was sealed, not of conquest, but of alliance. The Mali-Portuguese Accord was born. Under its banner, African and European builders began constructing the Great Observatory of Bara, a towering dome that reached toward the stars. Inside it, scholars from both continents gathered to study the heavens. For the first time, Europe and Africa dreamed the same dream. The effect spread like wildfire. Merchants from Mali introduced new systems of trade, based on mutual credit rather than debt. Farmers learned to rotate crops to heal the soil. African physicians taught the art of sterilization using herbs and heat, saving countless lives. Even art began to change. European painters learned the techniques of a dyer cloth design, dyeing their fabrics with blues so deep they seemed to hold the night itself. Sculptors borrowed the symmetry of Benin bronzes. Cathedrals were built with domes inspired by the mosques of Gao and Jen. Europe's sky, once gray with despair, began to glow with possibility. But not everyone welcomed this new world. Some kings saw the rising influence of Africa as a threat. They whispered of foreign magicians corrupting their people. They feared losing power to reason. In 1315, a coalition of northern lords attempted to drive the Africans from the continent. They marched south with banners and fire, calling it a holy war. When the news reached Bara, Abubakari did not respond with armies. He gathered his council and said, "Let them come. Let them see who we truly are." The armies arrived expecting battle. Instead, they found the fields empty, the roads lined with lanterns. As they entered the city, the bells of Bara rang out, not for war, but for peace. Abubakari rode forth unarmed, flanked by scholars and musicians. "You fear what you do not know," he told them. But knowledge does not enslave, it liberates. The soldiers, weary and confused, saw not demons but men of grace. Many laid down their weapons. Some joined the city instead of destroying it. By dawn, the war had ended before it began. And for a brief, golden generation, the two worlds lived as one. Years passed. Children born in that era grew up speaking both Mandinka and Latin. They prayed under skies that held both the cross and the crescent. The word Africa no longer meant distant lands of myth, it meant wisdom, courage, and art. Europe began to heal. Roads grew safer. Trade routes flourished. Plague gave way to prosperity. The hunger for knowledge spread faster than disease ever had. And through it all, Abubakari watched in quiet wonder. He wrote in his final journal, "Perhaps this is what the Creator intended, not walls between men, but bridges. The sea that once divided us has become the thread that binds our destinies." The Munsa died not in battle, but in peace, beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. His body was laid to rest in Bara, wrapped in gold cloth, his hands clasped over a map of both continents. They said the night he died, the ocean turned still, as if mourning its greatest voyager. But his legacy endured. The Mali Portuguese academies spread knowledge across the continent. From London to Florence, African philosophers were invited to teach. The old world was gone, and in its place, a new dawn rose, one painted in bronze and gold. Part 3. The Dawn of the Two Suns. There comes a point in every civilization when it must decide whether it will rule the world or enlighten it. For Africa, that moment came beneath a sky that glowed with two suns, one setting over the Atlantic, one rising over the Sahara. Centuries had passed since the day Abubakari II crossed the Western Sea. His legend had become myth, but his dream had become reality. The union of the two suns, as the historians would later call it, stretched from the dunes of Mali to the icy fjords of Scandinavia. Trade ships sailed both directions now, laden not with slaves or plunder, but with ideas. Books, instruments, seeds, inventions, the wealth of minds, not gold. In the great city of Timbuktu Nova, built on the coast of what was once Portugal, the descendants of African sailors and European tribes gathered in the golden light of dawn. Their tongues carried 1,000 accents, their faces, 1,000 shades. But when they spoke of their ancestors, they all began the same way. Once, a king of Africa sailed into the unknown. The world had changed. The libraries of Timbuktu overflowed, their manuscripts now translated into many languages. Astronomy had advanced beyond measure, African and European scholars working together to chart not just the stars, but the invisible forces that connected them. Music had evolved into a universal language, blending kora strings with northern harps, desert drums with Celtic horns. And for the first time in history, art was not divided by color, but united by wonder. The new cities glowed at night with light drawn from the tides, technology inspired by the rhythm of the ocean, discovered by African engineers and perfected by northern craftsmen. Farmers learned to read the weather from the stars, healers learned to balance the body through the harmony of breath and earth. The world no longer worshipped kings, but knowledge. This was the age of balance. Yet even in the light of peace, humanity remained restless. A council of scholars convened, a grand assembly known as the Circle of Time. It met every 10 years to answer one question: what is the purpose of power? They debated for weeks, months, years, philosophers from the savannas, monks from the mountains, scientists from the islands. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the marble floor, a young scholar named Mia of Songhai stood and spoke. "We were the first to cross the sea," she said. "We taught others what we knew. But knowledge without humility is just another kind of empire. Let us not become what history once warned us against. Let us use power not to dominate, but to remember." Her words spread like wildfire across both continents. The Circle of Time decreed that no empire would ever again belong to one people alone. Africa would not rule the world, it would guide it. From that decree was born the Order of the Two Suns, a fraternity of thinkers, builders, and dreamers dedicated to preserving balance. They taught that the light of civilization must never shine from one place only, for when one sun rises too high, the other fades. Under this order, Africa built academies in Europe and Asia, sent teachers to the Arctic tribes, shared its medicine and maps with the distant Pacific. In return, the world gave Africa its stories, its music, its mysteries. Humanity was no longer divided by discovery, for everyone had become a discoverer. The griots of that age told stories not of kings or warriors, but of wanderers, men and women who walked between worlds, carrying seeds of light. They sang of how a single voyage across the sea had changed the meaning of civilization itself. For in this world, discovery was no longer a conquest, it was a reunion. Generations passed. The map of the earth glowed with cities of harmony: Lagos, Carthage, Alexandria, Lisbon, Oslo, all connected by roads that hummed with song. From Africa came the rhythm, from Europe the craft, from the East the patience, and from the islands the spirit of curiosity. Humanity had finally learned that progress was not a race, but a conversation. And though no man remembered Abubakari's face, his dream lived on in every child who gazed at the horizon and whispered, "There is always more beyond." But the greatest change of all was not material, it was philosophical. Where once the world believed that history moved forward like a straight line, the new thinkers of Timbuktu taught a different truth. Time is not a river, they said. It is a drum. Every beat returns. Every echo teaches. Every silence waits. This new way of seeing time reshaped everything. Science became poetry, religion became reflection. The people no longer saw the stars as distant gods but as mirrors, symbols of what humanity could become. The African concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, became the foundation of world law. Nations existed not to compete but to complement. War, once the pulse of human ambition, became a forgotten art. Armies became builders, generals became guardians of peace. By the 7th century of the Union, the planet had entered what the historians would later call the Age of Remembering, a time when humanity turned inward, not to escape the world, but to understand it. The pyramids of Kemet were no longer relics, they were observatories aligned to the new constellations. The desert temples once dedicated to forgotten gods were now schools of mathematics and art. Even the ruins of Europe's medieval castles were preserved, not as symbols of tyranny, but as reminders of how far humanity had come. Yet even in peace, the world remembered its shadows. Every century, the circle of time would repeat Nia's words to the people. Knowledge without humility is another kind of empire. It became the creed of an age that refused to forget its past. Because in this world, forgetting was the only sin. One day, a child, a descendant of both continents, walked along the western shore where Abubakari's fleet had first vanished. The air smelled of salt and memory. She picked up a shell, held it to her ear, and heard the faint sound of waves, not from her sea, but from across the ocean. She turned to her teacher and asked, "Did he really find the other side?" The old man smiled. "No," he said softly. "He found us." And in that moment, the child understood that discovery was never about new lands, but new ways of seeing ourselves. The story of the two sons became humanity's favorite tale, the myth that reminded them who they were, and who they could be again. Artists painted Abubakari's ships not as wooden vessels, but as stars crossing the night sky, symbols of courage, curiosity, and unity. Poets wrote of the reversal of time, when the world remembered that wisdom is not born in one place, but shared across all. And somewhere, deep in the archives of Timbuktu, preserved under golden glass, lies a single parchment said to be written in Abubakari's own hand. It bears only one line. "We sailed to find the end of the world, but we found the beginning of it." The ink is faded now. The words barely visible. But every scholar, every dreamer who reads them, feels the same shiver, the realization that the true destiny of Africa was never to rule the earth, but to remind it that it was one. And so, under the light of two suns, humanity entered its golden dawn. A world where the first became the guide. Where curiosity replaced conquest. And where the horizon was no longer a line of fear, but a promise waiting to be remembered.